Hey, what is up everyone? Today I'm going to be editing a flash ambient photo using Capture One and Affinity Photo, and then I'm going to compare it to doing exactly the same in Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop. The reason I wanted to do this comparison is because Capture One and Affinity Photo offer a lifetime license for their software, which means you can use the particular version you bought for as long as you want. Capture One is a little bit more expensive. It costs £299, which I would guess is around $350. In terms of updates, they seem to be happening a little bit more frequent, which means that if you want to keep up and buy each new version, it's gonna cost you much more. When it comes to Affinity Photo, it's much more affordable. It costs £68, which I would assume is around $90. And what I also like about Affinity Photo is that their lifespan of each version seems to be fairly long. I bought my version 1 of their software back in 2018, which means for around 4 years I was able to get updates. So first let's jump into Capture One, which is our equivalent of Lightroom, and let's process our photographs. After that we'll export it into TIFF files and then blend them inside Affinity Photo. So here we are in Capture One, and let's start first by adding our photographs. So in the Library tab here, I'm going to click on plus and add the folder with my photos. I'll expand that, right click on the folder, and I'm going to synchronize it. And as you can see, it detects there's 12 photographs there. So I'm going to import all the images. I don't need to see the importer. Sometimes if you import a large quantity of photographs, you might want to tick that so you can pre-select which ones you want to actually add to your catalog. So let's sync that. On the right here, we have our thumbnails, few ambient shots. You can see the bright exposure, middle, and the one for the window view. For these shots, as you can see, I've turned the lights off. There was also a copy of those same angles with the lights on. Now I've pre-selected this frame here just to use those lights so I can paint them in. And then I have flash shots. So as you can see, some of them have the lights off as well, and some of them have the lights on. All right, so let's do some basic edits to our photos, and we'll start in the Style tab here. As you can see, Capture One detected that I'm using Sony A7 Mark III. It's set to the Pro Standard profile. There's also generic one, but I'm going to keep it at the Pro Standard. And for the curve is set to auto. You can select different curves. There's one for extra shadow if you want to see more details in the shadows. There's one with the high contrast if you like that look. Then there's the standard one, and we also have linear response, which is the one actually I'm going to use. I've been experimenting with it a little bit and I kind of like it. You do need to use curves adjustments to balance the images. Then in our lens correction, I'm going to enable diffraction correction. I shouldn't have any problems with diffraction, but I like to enable it just as a precautionary measure. Then we have the sharpness fall off, and I typically set it somewhere around 150 more or less. And then we have a light fall off as well. So as you can see on the edges where the vignetting appears, you can adjust these. So I think around 90 looks good for me. Let's move to the Adjust tab. Because we're using linear response, as you can see, it recovers highlights. Even if I drop the highlights significantly, there's not much change occurring. So I'm going to just drop it down to maybe somewhere around -25 or so. Let's raise our shadows. As soon as you move it a little bit, the shadows go up quite a lot. So I like to use it sparingly, probably somewhere around 30 or so looks good to me. And then we can adjust the whites a little bit. So I'll go up maybe by around 15. And then drop the blacks a little bit as well to introduce back the contrast to around similarly around -15. So next, let's adjust our curves, and I'm going to the Luma section. So I just want to affect the brightness, and we're gonna make it basically brighter here since it's supposed to be our brightest exposure. And And I'm going to introduce a little bit of an S-curve to add a little bit of contrast. I think that's okay for the moment. And then if we go down, let's have a look at the clarity. Put it somewhere maybe around 20 mark. Let's have a look at the structure. Maybe around 15 or so. You can also select the method you want to use. I do like natural quite a lot, but there's other ones like punch, which makes it a bit more contrasty, neutral, and also the classic. However, as I said, I'm going to go with natural. For me, this one looks the best. And then we have option for vignetting as well here. So if you want to fix the borders of your image a little bit, I'll maybe do around 0.1, 0.2, somewhere around there. Seems to be okay. And then we can go to the Refine tab. Here we can make our adjustments to sharpening, noise reduction, and a few other things. If you press Ctrl plus space on the image, you can actually zoom in. If I look at the image, for me, it's pretty sharp. And to be honest, Capture One by default adds pretty decent amount of sharpening. To me, it looks totally fine. So I'm just going to leave it as it is. Now, another thing I notice is we have Moray, and Capture One allows us to use the tab here to get rid of it. So currently it's on 0. If we do it all the way to 100 and look back, as you can see, it disappeared. So if I move this one here, so we can look at the live results. And basically what I'm going to do is drop the amount to a point where I can see it's disappeared. So somewhere around 75 for me looks fine. Now what we can do, while this thumbnail is selected, I'm going to press Ctrl Shift plus C. That's going to copy all the adjustments. And then I'm going to click on the first thumbnail under the one we've just edited. Press Shift and click on the last one. And then you can press Ctrl Shift V. And that's going to apply all the adjustments we've just copied into all the selected photos. So this is supposed to be our middle frame, so it's a little bit too dark. For that, I'm just going to increase our exposure here a little bit. And at the same time, drop the highlights a little bit. Maybe that's a little bit too much, so I'm just going to drop it there. We're going to use quite a lot of parts of the brightest one anyway. Let's have a look at our window frame, and to be honest, it looks pretty decent to me. So I'm just going to keep it as it is. Now let's move to our flash shots. So obviously these will need white balance adjustments. So I'm going to press W. That will enable the white balance tool picker. And I'm going to find a white or a neutral gray area that we can use to sample. And that looks good to me. And then I might adjust a couple things here. So I might increase whites a little bit here. And same with the shadows, just a tiny little bit, and maybe add a little bit of contrast to give those flash images a little bit of a punch. And I'm going to press Ctrl Shift C to copy all the adjustments, and let's select everything. And somewhere in between here we have the shot with the lights, so I'm going to Control click on that to deselect it. And then let's apply these adjustments. Let's have a look at our ambient layer with the lights. It looks pretty decent. I think we can leave it as it is. So we have our photographs prepped now. In that case, if we Control A to select all of them, you can right click and export. I'm going to export these as TIFF files. So let's do that. Okay, so that's done. Now let's jump to Affinity Photo. Let's go to the File menu and New Stack. This way we can add all the photographs we've just exported into one file. Click on Open. And Affinity can automatically align our images, but I'm going to deselect that because I've shot these on a tripod, so I'm pretty sure they'll be okay for the time being. Let's press OK. And we have our stack group here. All our images are in this live stack group. And Affinity seems to be applying some kind of algorithm to blend these together. So what I'm going to do is go inside the group, select all of these layers and move it outside of the group. Actually, we can delete the group as well. And let's have a look what we have. So we have our flash layer here. So let's find, okay, we have the light layer. So I'm going to move it to the top and I'm going to rename it just so it's easier for us to recognize. Okay, so we have our windows. And we have ambient. And another ambient layer here. So let's select those three and move them to the top, just underneath the lights. Our brighter layer at the top. With our brighter ambient layer selected, let's press and hold Alt and click on the mask layer button here. That's going to hide our ambient layer. And press B to select the brush tool. And if you press and hold Control, Alt, and left mouse button, and then you can go left and right to increase and decrease the size of the brush. So let's get a fairly large brush. And then if you go up and down, you can increase and decrease hardness of the brush. We want hardness set to 0 on that, so it's very nice and soft brush. Now make sure you have a white color selected, and let's paint in the areas in our image which we want to brighten up a little bit. I'm kind of avoiding the bright areas in the image. Once done, let's click on the both ambient layers and let's group them by pressing Ctrl+G. And let's name the group ambient. And now we can work on the windows. So let's select our pen tool so we can make selections. If you press P on the keyboard, you can select the pen tool. So let's zoom in on the windows here and let's make selections of the windows. Fortunately, these are pretty easy. So I'm just going to do the corners. For the time being, I'm going to ignore the curtain rod here. So now if we need, we can go back and adjust our points on each selection. If you press Ctrl, you can make adjustments to the placement of your point. After all the adjustments are done, we can select all curve layers here. Go into the layer menu at the top, geometry, and then click on Add, and that will create one layer. So all these paths are here. And now we can turn them into selection and make sure the Windows layer is selected. And then we can click on Mask Layer. And we've got our windows. So that covers the ambient layer and Windows layer. Let's work on our flash layers now. So let's remove the visibility of ambient and window layers. First, let's find the layer that we can use as our base. And this one actually will do. So I'm going to drop it at the bottom. And let's look what parts of this image we want to use. So straight away I can see we can use those parts here that show picture frames. If you press Alt and then click on Mask Layer, let's press B for our brush tool. And let's paint in those areas here. Okay, let's move to the next layer and see. Okay, so there's a slight improvement on the picture frame here. Again, press Alt and Mask Layer. I'm gonna change the size of the brush to a little bit smaller, and let's paint those areas here. Let's move on to the next one. So maybe parts of the bed and those shelves here we might use. So Let's mask it, and then I like to zoom in once in a while, especially if I'm painting to somewhere where I was standing, because very often you can paint in parts of yourself and not even realize it. Let's move to the next layer. To be honest, I'm just going to ignore this one. Let's actually put it in the bin. There's nothing really there that we can use, so let's move to the next one. Okay, so as you can see, the flash was here off screen to try and light up this area. So what I'm going to do is first of all change the blending mode to lighten. So if I turn it on and off, you can see what it does. Let's mask the layer. And let's paint in those areas gently here. All right, let's move on to the next one. Again, this one doesn't really add anything, so we can bin it. And the last one here, maybe this lamp here. Let's mask the layer, zoom in a little bit. I'm going to decrease the size. And just gently paint in. So we can retrieve some of those details in the lamp here, the lampshade. Okay, so now just to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to select all flash layers and press Ctrl G to add them to the group. And let's name the group Flash. Next thing I want to do is basically remove some of the color casts. So as you can see, I do get quite a lot of cyan green around the corners. And then we have some yellows and reds in the ceiling and walls. So what I'm going to do is press Ctrl U. That's going to bring up hue, saturation, and luminance adjustment. And we'll go through the colors here. So let's select greens. And if I increase the saturation, you'll be able to see where that green appears. So really, anywhere it appears, we don't really need it apart from the window. But we're actually using a different layer for windows, so we're not really worried if we're going to desaturate the whole thing. Now I'm going to go down fairly hefty, probably around 70% or so, so not all the way down, but around 70% should be fine. Let's look at science. Again, we can increase the saturation to see where it appears. As you can see, walls, mainly some of the bed and the picture here. So I'm going to drop it again to somewhere around maybe 65%. Let's look at the blues. We have some on the bed, so I'm just going to drop it to around 70 as well. Magentas, we don't really need them much anyway. We have some on the bed mattress and a little bit near the window, so we can actually drop all the way down. And then let's look at yellows. Okay, there's quite a bit of areas there. I'm gonna drop it maybe around 40%. And then let's look at reds. There are some reds on the mattress and the window frame. I'm going to drop it maybe around 40%. So now I want to add the mask layer onto the HSL adjustment. So I'm going to press Alt and click on Mask Layer. And that mask actually needs to be moved on top of the HSL adjustment. So it only affects that particular adjustment layer. I'm going to switch to the brush tool. Make sure I have a white selected as a foreground color. And I'm going to increase the size of the brush a little bit. And now I basically just want to paint over the walls and the ceiling, trying to avoid other areas, so to be careful not to desaturate them. But I don't have to be super accurate with it, and I'll have pretty decent results. Let's collapse the flash group, and then let's turn on visibility for the ambient layer and go into the blending mode and change it to luminosity. We can either adjust the opacity here to blend both layers together, or we can create a mask and do it manually, but I'm just going to set the opacity at around 50%. Let's switch on the Windows layer, go to our Lights layer, turn on the visibility, and let's change the blending mode to Lighten. And as soon as I do that, you can see how it switched on the lights, but it also actually brightened up the windows here, and you can see some of the artifacts and so on. To remove that, let's create a mask and change our foreground color to black. And let's just paint over the windows here, and that's going to get rid of that. So here we are. That's basically our blend done. What I often like to do is to add the curves adjustment to the ambient layer. So if you press Ctrl M, we can do that and maybe create an S curve to add a little bit of contrast. And then once done, let's export it to a TIFF file. You can press Ctrl Alt Shift S. And I'm just going to remove any compression and export the file. If we go back to Capture One, let's right click on our folder with the photographs and synchronize it again. It should recognize there's a new image in there. Let's sync it. And we have our property image here. Now I want to really adjust the keystoning. So I can select the verticals. And then we can go to the Adjust tab and make our final changes there. Okay, so that's about it. Our image is done here. For the second part of the video, let's try and edit the same photograph using Lightroom and Photoshop. I've imported all the photographs into Lightroom. So if we go into the Develop module, first I'm going to apply one of my presets. I've got one here for Ambient. I'm gonna reset the exposure though. Maybe drop it just a little bit. I'm going to select the other ambient layers and I'm going to synchronize the changes to them as well. And let's have a quick look. So this is supposed to be our mid frame, so it basically needs exposure adjustment. And then this is our window layer. I'm going to make a little bit of an adjustment here. This is the light layer here, so I'm just going to drop highlights and whites a little bit. And let's go to our flash layer. I'm going to apply again a preset. First, let's deal with the white balance. So press W to select the white balance selector. And we're going to pick an area that has a white color on it or natural gray. And that looks pretty okay. We can make little adjustments here, so I'm just going to drop the exposure a little bit. And let's select the remaining flash layers and synchronize the changes. So some of these we might need to do little adjustments. Okay, now let's select all those layers, right click, edit in and open as layers in Photoshop. Let's start by organizing our layers. I'm going to pick up the lights layer, move it to the top and let's rename it. Then I'm going to get the window layer and rename that as well. and we're left with our ambient layers. So I'm going to press Alt and add a mask. B for the brush tool. I'm going to hold Alt and right mouse button, and then if I move left and right, I can change the size of the brush. And if I go up and down, I can change the hardness. So I'm just going to change the hardness to 0. I have a flow set to around 20 at the moment, and I'm going to gently paint in those areas that are a little bit darker on this image, just to balance it a little bit. And let's select both of the ambient layers. I'm going to press Ctrl G, rename it to Ambient. And let's change its blending mode to luminosity. Select all the flash layers and reverse their order. Now, I do have a keyboard shortcut I made for it myself, but if you don't, you can go to the layer menu, arrange, and reverse. And I've set my keyboard shortcut to Alt Control plus T. And let's just remove the visibility apart from the bottom layer. Let's start from here, add a mask, and we can paint in the areas that are better in this image here. Let's move to the next one, see if there's any improvements. So maybe just a little bit in this area, and on the bed mattress it's a little bit brighter. And then always remember to zoom in and check if you haven't painted yourself in by mistake. It does happen quite a bit. Alright, let's move to the next. This one actually I think we can remove, it doesn't add anything. This one, we want to light up this area here. I'm going to change it to lighten blending mode. Press Alt and click on the mask to create a black mask. And I'm going to gently paint in the light on the left hand side. Let's check the next one. I might just paint in that area here. Next one, nothing here, and this one is not really needed either, so I'm just going to remove them. Now let's select all flash layers, press Ctrl G to add it to the group, rename the group to Flash. Alright, so I'm going to press Alt, Shift, Ctrl and E, and it's going to create a merged copy of everything. And I'm going to use Replace Color Adjustment on this layer, and I did create my own keyboard shortcut for it as well. But if you don't have one, you can go to the Image menu, Adjustments, and go down to Replace Color. I've set my keyboard shortcut to Alt Control plus D. And what this allows us is basically select a color, and we can add to the selection by pressing Shift, or remove from selection by pressing Alt. And that basically allows us to create a selection of the color we want to affect. So if I go down here to saturation, I can lower the saturation all the way down. And if I press Shift and just add other areas, you can see they're being added to selection and desaturated. And I really like this tool a lot in Photoshop and use it a lot because, as you can see, it really doesn't affect much other areas. Quite often, if you use hue saturation adjustment, you will desaturate lights and other things in the image, but this one really affects a small area. And you can also adjust fuzziness here to select how strict the selection is. So as you can see, as I increase the fuzziness, the selection kind of broadens more and more and more. And if I drop it very low, you can see how we get the colors back in the picture frame here, but also we're reintroducing some other casts. Again, you can press and hold Shift and add the areas you want to add to the selection. Once you're happy, press OK. And I'm going to press Alt and add a mask. And then I can paint in the effect just in the areas I want to affect. So I can remove the casts from the walls, from the ceiling. And what I love about this is that you can also drop the opacity to kind of help it blend a little bit better. Now, if there's some areas, like for example here, there's still some color cast, what we can do is add a layer, and I'm going to change the blend mode to color. Let's select the white color, and then we can gently paint it over here to kind of remove that color cast. Okay, so if we put everything in the group again, and then let's enable our ambient layer, we can drop the opacity to maybe around 50%. Let's enable the Windows layer. And personally, what I like to do, because for me it's faster, is using the polygonal lasso tool. So we're going to create a selection here. I'm going to ignore the curtain rod. Press Alt, so it's going to add to selection. Now we can press on the mask, and it's going to show us our cutout here. The window layer is a little bit too dark for us. What we can do is press Ctrl and click on the mask here. And let's add curves adjustment. So it's going to copy the mask we had selected, and then we can brighten it up. And if you're dealing with sky that obviously you want to be a little bit more visible, what you can do is add the curves adjustment into a group and put a mask on the group, and then you can erase it where the sky is. And finally, we've got our lights. So let's change blending mode to lighten. Let's create a black mask, and then we can paint the lights in. So as you can see, because of that lighten mode, we have a little bit of a problem with the colors. So what I'm going to do is just mask the cast coming from the bulb. This one looks fairly okay, so I'm just gonna do it a little bit here. And this one similarly. And basically you can leave it at that, but also what we can do is I'm going to press Ctrl J to copy that layer, delete the layer mask. I'm going to change it back to normal mode, add the black mask, and then we can paint in the color without this red cast if you want. Let's go back to the ambient layer. And let's add curves adjustment. Press and hold Alt and click between curves and the ambient layer to clip it. Or the other option is here in the curves properties panel, and you can click on the icon here and it will clip it as well. So let's make a little adjustment here. Okay, I'm happy with that. So let's save the file. And we're back in Lightroom, so we can make final adjustments here. I'm just going to drop a little preset here. And finally, let's fix the verticals. So let's go to Transform and use the guided one. You can use keyboard shortcut Shift+T. right, let's export the image. Looking at both of these images, I can quickly see the difference between Capture One and Lightroom in saturation. Capture One seems to have much more muted colors. So if I look at the wood, you can see it's much less saturated, and to be honest, looks a little bit more realistic to me. The version from Lightroom seems a little bit too punchy. However, I like the frames. You know, you can see that nice kind of yellow golden color compared to kind of desaturated one on the Capture One version. These obviously can be adjusted, so I can increase saturation in Capture One a little bit to get the colors to pop. I guess it's depending on your preference, really. In all honesty, I like both images. They seem totally fine to me, but I think I prefer Lightroom a little bit more. Although looking at it, you know, I might need to drop the saturation on the oranges a little bit. It seems to me quite punchy compared to Capture One. But all in all, they're fairly close. I guess they can be matched better, especially if I would use maybe not the linear curve on Capture One. Let me know what you think, and if you use Capture One or Affinity Photo at all, how do you find it compared to Lightroom and Photoshop? I guess that's everything from me for today. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Cheers.